Welcome to the Sacred Rebellion, the space where truth isn't filtered, sovereignty is sacred, and the rebellion is a return to self. This isn't just a podcast, it's a remembering. We're here to break the trance of comfortability, reclaim our gifts, and rise as the embodied rebels we were born to be. Here we journey with the wild hearts, the way showers, and the visionaries who choose their truth over comfort, their mission over fear, and their soul over the system. This is where the coded ones come to speak, the ones who didn't fit in because they were never meant to, the ones who turn their pain into power and their story into their medicine. So drop in, take a breath, and let's remember who we are, one sacred rebellion at a time. Today we welcome Jessica Taylor to the show. She is a channeler for the 7D Pleiadians, an intuitive and a channeler devoted to helping others remember their purpose of their human experience and align with it on a soul level. She channels high frequency guidance and insight to support both individual and collective evolution, guiding others into their deeper alignment with their true essence. Her mission is to help others transform limiting thoughts, emotional patterns, and reactive cycles so they can access higher states of consciousness and embody more joy, love, and abundance in every area of life. Jessica offers in a range of intuitive sessions and designed to support your ascension and journey along your soul level journey. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about what was the most defining spiritual rebellion moment and how did it shift your understanding of faith, self, or source?
I think actually it was more a rebellion where I could incorporate spirituality. So I grew up quite aware of different dimensional planes and entities and things, and I was quite kind of psychic as a kid, so that aspect wasn't something that suddenly exploded into my experience. But moreover, it was during the lockdowns I started to I was very, very skeptical of it right from the beginning of the situation and the narrative that was going on, like right from the start. And at the time, just before that, I had my first child, who was, I think, 10 months old when the lockdowns broke. And when I found out I was pregnant with him, I was actually studying biology because I wanted to become a midwife at the time. And I did a lot of deep research into immunization, and that brought a lot of skepticism about that. Also, in the October of 2019, I had a premonition in a dream about which I had written down in a dream diary, forgotten about and found about a year and a half later, of there being this superbug being released that everyone was going to be terribly scared of, but that the actual harmful element to it was in a vaccine, and it was a deliberate depopulation agenda. So I kind of blew my mind when I found that diary and found that precognition there. Obviously, depending on whether you believe that that's what the narrative is, but that's the kind of angle I was seeing it from.
Yeah, same. I saw it from the same perspective.
Yeah.
And for me, in 2012, when my first son was born, that was one of our biggest, awakenings. I feel like with each child you have an awakening. I don't know about you, but that's kind of like every child I've ever had, which I'm not having any more children, but it's like an awakening. You discover new things. Anyways, continue.
Yeah, and I think you become highly psychic when you're pregnant as well, and you can get different drop-ins and stuff go on at that time. So yeah, we've kind of fast forwarded into the first lockdown, and I became in touch with a group of people, a big group of people actually, who were all very much on the same page. And I'd been to some of the protests, but I found that it felt misaligned for me, that kind of fighting back in that sense. I didn't really feel like we were getting anywhere. It was massively underrepresented, like how big the protests were and things, and I just got frustrated and just got really kind of cross with what was going on. And instead I decided so I'd been doing spiritual work anyway, and I decided to start up a meditation group to use intention, and to create these highly guided meditations, which I channel through first, write down, and then record. And we ended up with several hundred people each week doing these meditations together, because it grew very, very quickly. This was definitely a movement that was going on at the time, and so there were a lot of people that were trying to find their tribe. So they were drawn to the work very quickly. So there'd be about 30 of us would meet in person, because that was literally as much space as we could cram someone into someone's front room, because this was still at the time where you could get into trouble for meeting up and all that kind of thing. And then I'd send out the recording, and loads and loads of people would take part. And it was just amazing how quickly it snowballed. It was like creating that intention was just drawing more and more people to work together and to start using frequency and directed like positive kind of thought to start changing the narrative, and it did feel like it was having some kind of effect. So in that sense, that's what I meant, that like for me the rebellion was through spirituality. It was like the way to push back was not to push back, was to like go into more of a state of flow and to focus on the outcomes that we did want to create rather than what it was that was making us angry.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've seen it too. It's like I can scream and yell on the internet of, different things. I got pretty vocal when I discovered, the harmfuls of vaccines when I was, I became a new mother. And it's funny because when you ask people if you're, quote, an anti-vaxxer, I don't actually believe I'm, quote, an anti-vaxxer. What I think is I'm an educated woman that made a conscious choice that I didn't feel like that was the appropriate choice for me and my family. And it's very interesting because my husband has type 1 diabetes, and now my son does too. And it's been very interesting because every single one of the side effects of immunizations is an autoimmune, essentially. And when I went through peer review articles, which were accessible in 2012, by the way, they are not accessible anymore because I had like a whole file of these little peer review articles of reading, through doctorate, and actually they didn't even come from the United States. A lot of them came from like Australia and China and a lot of those things, and being able to like bring them over and actually know. And what I found out really quickly was they know exactly. They've known for years what they cause and what they do in our bodies. And essentially what we're dealing with at this point is high levels of arsenic, high levels of mercury, high levels of metals in people's bodies. And, those lead to an array of things. The body can't handle that load of toxins in the system. And so essentially that was one of my awakenings, was essentially unraveling big pharma here in the United States. And obviously, like, I'm grateful my son has insulin and my husband has insulin to survive. But the sad part is like that controls a lot of our lives here in America because of the cost of, essentially someone being diabetic. Right. And so when my son was like born, I went through and I was like, we're just going to wait and I'm going to do some research. And what I noticed was a lot of countries don't even vaccinate their children until the age of 2, where we're vaccinating children with a hepatitis shot as soon as they're born.
Yeah. And then it's very early here too.
Yeah, and then being told and shamed and guilted. And I even had a doctor when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I refused the flu shot and the whooping cough shot. And he pretty much looked at me straight in the face and said, "Your daughter will die if you do not get this." And I feel like that's almost like completely against your ethics as a doctor to curse someone and essentially put an ill will intent of fear into someone's body to essentially do that. And it's very interesting because she ended up getting influenza at 8 weeks, and guess what? She didn't die. Surprising.
Yeah. What a miracle.
Thank goodness for breast milk, because I just like nursed her, So it's like, I think that if doctors were, if we taught informed consent of like, here's the risks if you don't, and here's the risk if you do. I have 2 very healthy children.
Yeah.
Very healthy children.
When I was pregnant with my first child, so I did all the research before he was born, so I was very kind of clued in, and it was that big pharma awakening was actually a massive part of awakening to everything else, because you understand the depth of the corruption and the levels and the money that's involved with it. And when you start looking at the people that I can't quote this exactly, but I know at the time when I was doing some research, I found out that one of the CEOs for Google, or the parent group of Google, which is called Alphabet, was also one of the CEOs of GlaxoSmith at the time. And you start unraveling that, and you realize, whoa, there is a massive attempt to blind us to everything. And I think once you have really looked into something, right, you step into your power with it, don't you? Same with anything else. Once you feel like this inside out, you just step into that and you go in there. And I never really had any situations where doctors or nurses were overly confrontational about trying to push vaccines onto me. I mean, at one point they said that I should have the MMR while I was pregnant because I had no record of having the MMR, but they told me I was naturally immune to rubella, to German measles, which is one of the ones covered in the MMR. Yet they were still trying to tell me that I needed the vaccine, even though I had natural immunity. I think it was to 2 of the components.
Money.
And other things that came into that as well, and we were just like, absolutely not. So then when the COVID stuff came out and they dropped the V word into the narrative, it was like, oh, this is what this is about. Okay, right, like, game on, let's go.
Yeah. Well, and essentially what it did is it caused a mass ripple of an awakening. It's
Yes.
like people who thought I was crazy 13 years
Yeah.
ago are like, surprise, surprise.
It was
Even
a
family
great thing
members
to
that are
see.
like, you were right about vaccines. I was like, oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I
It
didn't
was
just
such a
make
good
this
thing to
choice
see.
lightly, right? Like, I mean, especially if you look at my background, like I grew up super like in religion. My father's military, my mother's a teacher. I mean, that's pretty like pretty typical American that would like follow the narrative, And so, I'm really grateful. I have a partner that is very much. I think he's more aware, like in things like he definitely sees narratives even better than I do. So I'm grateful for that because that he was like, I think we should like hold off on immunizations, and I was like, oh. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Cool. Yeah.
So then just my personality, it's like, and you get to know me a little bit. I'm the type of person that like when I want to figure something out, I'm going to know everything there is to know about it so that if I do get in a confrontation with
Mm.
somebody, I have the power to speak truth. And I have the power to say, I know XYZ. And I will tell you, I have a child with type 1 diabetes. Even though he has type 1, he's like stupid healthy. When he was diagnosed, actually at the end of 2020, we were in the hospital and they, obviously saw he hadn't been immunized. And I was like, yeah, so your child hasn't been immunized. And here's all your risks. And I was like, yeah, I know. And they're like, but do you realize? I'm like, yeah, I know. I probably actually know more about vaccines than you do. How many articles have you read? Like, maybe two, because I know they don't teach that in medical school a whole lot. It's just like here's how much money you get from Blue Cross if you make XYZ, if you get all your clients to be immunized. Like I know you get a kickback. I already know that. So it's like fascinating because if they get nasty with me, then that's when my sassy, spicy Scorpio side gets out.
Yeah. Oh, I'm Scorpio too. There you go. You just go straight into power.
Oh yeah, I'm
Power.
just like, oh yeah, and Mama Bear, like
Yeah.
Mama Bear
Yeah.
comes out, and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
here I come.
During the protest, this song kind of came out that had come from the Maori women in New Zealand because they were a lot of that community was very awake and aware as to what was going on.
Yeah.
And it was called The Cry of the Mothers, and like you've so got to look it up. Like it's just the most powerful thing. It's only short. And at like one of the London protests, a group of mothers started at that, and they're just like right in the faces of the police, not touching them, not causing any trouble, but they just sing this like really kind of powerful. And it is that cry that like, I'm going to protect my children no matter what.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is like, that's why they had the witch hunts, right? Because they didn't want us to, they knew, I'm getting like full body chills here.
Yeah, me too.
They knew that if they took women and we grouped together, that's why it was illegal. If we moved together in groups, they knew we were unstoppable because numbers and like gathering together as powerful women, especially when you bring out like the mama bear, right? Moving together in groups, they knew the patriarch knew they wouldn't be able to hold up. And so that's where that's a lot of the witch hunt was essentially the king was like, yes, I don't want women to work. And then we were all like, we all had jobs, like whether that was like midwifery, or working with herbs, or that's where a lot of like if you actually study the history of witchcraft, which I've researched the heck out of it and learned a lot, because I mean my first half of my awakening was like, I'm being burned again, here we go.
Oh god, yeah, big time.
It's like how many times was I burned, and so but the interesting part is like that also brings forward where that divide, right? Even in the divide of like, well, so and so I don't want to share clients because I'm going to have lack of like that competition. Also, people need to realize is also witch.
And it's still, I've seen that a lot within the spiritual community. There's
so bad.
Really, really obvious. It's still kind of like the 90s in that clambering over somebody else to get the piece of the pie. And I think that we're stepping out of that. Like we're starting to move out of that vibration, but it takes a little bit of time for that resonance where it's changed into a different vibe, and then the action becomes different to catch on. Yeah. But yeah, we'll totally notice that. And I think it's interesting that at the moment, a lot of people noticed, particularly in 2020, 20 to 21, 22, early 22, just how many women were part of the awakening movement, like how it was really quite female led. There were like some guys that were making obviously amazing documentaries like Mickey Willis with Plandemic, and there was all that kind of side coming out. But in terms of boots on the ground, the protests were women led. Yep. And the spiritual side of it has been female led. So it's like finally we're getting back that from that 500 years ago, we're actually healing that karmic cycle and no longer afraid because of those events in the past to step in and like begin to take that power back and not be silenced and not be shut down by fear anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I started, I started a women's group back in 2022, and it's called Soul. I've had it for 3 years, and pretty much the intention behind that group was to create a women's group that didn't have competition, that healed the witch wound and brought community. That was the only intention behind it. And it's so fascinating because, you know, people would join the group and they'd be like, hey, you know, I'm offering like this free service. Can I share it? And I'm like, please share it. Like, please share it, you know, because I don't think I have friends and I'm like, hey, like, this is kind of out of my scope. I'm going to send you to so-and-so. That's the connection. Yes. That's the next level of awareness in the women's and healing, is realizing like, I don't do foot zonings. I'm not going to massage your feet. But you know what? I know someone who's really good that I will send to you. Or, you know, I don't channel 7D Pleiadians. And if you're Pleiadian, you need that, I would send people to you, you know, because it's like everyone has their niche and their medicine, because that's what's unique. That's what it's our blueprint, right? And what people have to realize is that each piece of the pie requires all of us, not just you, not just me, but just all of us coming together. That's the unity, right? That's the oneness frequency. Yeah. And when we get out of our freaking head, out of the lack, you know, I'm scared because I won't have, if I lose this client, then I won't have this money and this, like, but if you actually knew that money was regulated by your nervous system, that lack mentality wouldn't be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's be an intentional element to it, but with social media as well, that's become a really vicious comparison site, basically, for women looking at other women, like how they look, how they're presented, what their message is. It's not, you know, it's not just about what the product is on offer. It's like the whole package, like who's going to have like the prettiest parcel to, you know, to the package and things.
Yeah.
And
how many followers do you have? Oh, yeah. You know what? You have 15,000 followers. She's better than the person that only has 1,000.
Yeah, and it's like there are some people that just don't really engage with those platforms very much, so they're like their followers are lower and stuff, but the work that they're doing is absolutely profound. Mm-hmm. So I'm really looking forward to seeing because you know everything shows up in the energy before it shows up in the material, right? So we might be transcending that kind of vibration, but at the moment we're still seeing it in a very physical sense. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that shift where there's not that kind of competition anymore, and you know you don't need to put everything on show to sell your product, and you know we're kind of transcending that. So it's interesting just the way that it seems to parallel, like you're saying, the witch wound and the experiences that we've had so far back.
Yep. Yeah, it is. It's very reciprocal, and I think that a lot of the way that we perceive ourselves as women, the more we step into our power, that authenticity is going to either, I tell people all the time when they're stepping into their power, it's going to either bring people in or it's going to repel people. And both are good. Like you have to realize both are good, because it's like I posted a post yesterday and it was like, I'm going to spread pixie dust wherever I go. And some people are going to be like, ooh, pixie dust. And some people are like, pixie dust. Either way, it's awakening them. Either way, it's awakening you. And you have to realize is like either people are going to love you or trigger you, but either way, you're actually cracking people open. Both aspects are being cracked open. So anyways, do you believe humanity is returning to organized religion or moving towards a more sovereign individualized connection with God or source, whatever you believe?
I think there's going to be, I think we're seeing it. It seems to be a resurgence towards Orthodox religion of multiple faiths as well. So like in the last 20 years especially, we've seen a lot more kind of radicalization of different religious groups, of several of them. I'm not singling any one out here because I think we've seen it across the board. And I think there's more people now that are kind of there's a lot of people that are having awakenings in terms of politically that are going into Christianity, or that have had really, you know, dark times over the last 10 years and they're taking on Christianity. I think that comes into possibly that the Christ consciousness is coming through really strongly at the moment. So a lot of people are tuning into that energy, but for so many, it filters straight to something old that's familiar. So It's like, okay, we need to kind of go back to something that I know, and this is how I'm going to be able to get in touch with this energy. I need it through somebody else. I can't find it myself. And I think that's just, it's kind of a way of coping with finding out that everything is an illusion, essentially. You know, discovering the matrix, unplugging, right? Suddenly your whole kind of reality is thrown into a totally different perspective, and then it's like, well, so where do I belong? Like, what part, like, who's going to kind of be there to guide me through this? A lot of people are coming into an individualized spiritual awakening, so they're finding out that actually they can guide themselves through it, or maybe they just want to find like one mentor or someone to just kind of trigger it for them and then go off on their own path. But others are going fully into groups, into religions, you know, and finding that way. So I think that's just kind of part of the chaotic process of a mass awakening, of people having to adapt to such a different frequency, because that's happening right now, right? Okay, so human consciousness is changing, so our frequency is changing, and it's very destabilizing for a lot of people, especially if they have a lot of density, if they have a lot of trauma or a lot of things in their past that they aren't happy about, you know, and that they don't know how to shake off. They're looking for somebody to facilitate and help them get through that, because it's like trying to unpack a mountain full of debris, right, and not knowing how to go about it. But I have kind of like asked my guides about this a little bit, like, well, where are we going to kind of go with this though? Like, because I think that we have much more power, and we also have more compassion when we understand unity consciousness, but when we understand that we are also like part of that divine spark, and it doesn't have to be facilitated by someone else. So I was kind of, you know, concerned really in the idea of a lot of the power going back into various institutions, and they kind of dropped in with it like, it might take a few years, there's some kinks here that are gonna need to be ironed out, but essentially it's just a way for people to learn how to connect with that consciousness again, until they're ready to then step away from that illusion as well, and start to find it within. So my kind of guidance on that was that actually you know, collectively you are going to find your way out of always placing your power at the hands of someone else, and start to realize that it is a connection that you're able to tune into once you've just kind of tuned out the noise, really.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who's left religion, I completely can validate that, because I think that was probably the turning point for me, because I was like, I can't be my full self, my like channeling, psychic, you know, intuitive self in religion, because most Christian beliefs believe that what we do is like demonic, right? And that's, and I know that because, I mean, I live next door to a lot of LDS people and, you know, people who are in those faiths, and you know, I'm the witch, you know, that's what they don't let their kids play with my kids. Like, it's very, very separated.
Wow.
And so, and then you have some people that don't care, you know, and so it's like differentiated with different things. But the fact of it is like, it's really hard to step away from that I think it's like a codependency relationship, to be honest with you. But some people need that. Like, some people need to go from essentially like rebellion in a way of like, you know, self-sabotage and things like that, and almost like a structure. And so I think that some people are moving into that structural aspect so they have community.
Yeah.
Especially in like places where I live, here in Idaho, is like people want community. And if they leave religion, their kids don't have community. And so for them, they pretend, it's like almost like a pretend to stay in religion or to stay in a faith specifically so that your children aren't ostracized. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. I mean, your surroundings are very, very different to mine. There's not a lot of Christianity left in England.
Okay.
I think there's still sort of trickles of it really, but there's not a lot of spirituality in England. And at the moment, we're still very much under an agenda in terms of politically and things. I don't think there's been as much awakening here as there has been in the States, or maybe it just hasn't found its voice yet. But yeah, there's a lot of, you know, kind of hardline atheism really. And I don't think that's any more helpful than finding something else. You know, if you believe that you're just a physical body, you just miss out on so much of what the human experience is actually about. But it also means that you are much more likely to be in a state of fear, because you're constantly trying to protect the only life that you believe that you have.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, my aunt died, and I watched one of her children just completely lose it, because she's essentially atheist, and watching her see that like she's never going to have interaction with that soul or that person ever again. And like, you know, being raised in Mormon culture and a Mormon household, you know, afterlife was always just like a natural thing. And I know when I completely took my faith and just like, you know, like had to like completely just say, okay, I don't believe in anything. That's kind of how I had to like almost swipe the slate so that I could be like, okay, what do I actually believe and what is actually anchored in truth so that I could move forward in my life that wasn't entangled. And I mean, when you deprogram a religion, especially if you're raised in it, it's a lot. It's a lot to be like, okay, is this actually like, is this a program I'm running? Is this, I mean, even the implants that you have to remove out of your body, there's a lot of, and that's not just Mormonism, that's like religion across the board. There's like this implant and it's between your shoulder blades and it looks kind of like it's like infused into your like spine and across it almost looks like a cross kind of thing, and it sits in your shoulder blades, and a lot of it's like pulls you back, like literally holds you back. And once you remove that, the nervous system actually opens up more so that you can, because it's attached to this back part of your, you know, the brainstem, which your brainstem we know is spirituality. That's like a lot of where codes come through is like through that area, that nervous system. And the nervous system and the subconscious, they're kind of like, you know, they coexist together, because you can't have, if you have subconscious beliefs that aren't working and nervous system that aren't like, they communicate, right? So your beliefs tag into your nervous system. And we know this as people who do healing. And so for me, it was a lot of that, like, okay, did I not wear that like outfit that showed a little bit of skin because of my Mormonism, or is it because I'm not comfortable? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, so I have to constantly still ask myself, you know, those questions. And also like really realizing, like, for me is, I mean, I don't attend family functions that have anything to do with Mormonism. And you know, some people think that's like not being supportive, but for me, it's like, I don't want to have to sit and explain to my kids how that's not real. You know what I'm saying? And so like we went to like a baptism and they're giving them the gift of the Holy Ghost, and my 9-year-old at the time, he looks at me, he's like, so they believe they're giving you the gift of your intuition?
Cool, yes.
And I was like, yep. And he's like, okay. He's like, so they don't believe they have intuition until they're like 8? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, that's not true. And so it's like,
that's so cool that they're aware of that.
I was like, so that's your intuition? Like, what are they, he was so confused. And so for me, it's just like fascinating. So yeah, we don't attend any like family functions when it comes to like spiritual, like religion, because it's just, my kids are like, this is so weird, you know, like they're just like so weird. And the, you know, we just had Easter not too long ago, and my kids, I'm like, hey, what's Easter about? And they're like an Easter god, maybe? It's like, and then my one, she's like, I think it's about Jesus. Didn't Jesus die or something? But did he actually die this time of year? And I was like, no, it's just a holiday they decided to create. She's just laughing. And I was like, actually, Easter was created from the pagan holiday Esther. And it's like, you know, essentially the bunnies and like recreation in spring and stuff like that. And they're like, okay, you know, so it's like kind of interesting to teach your children actually where holidays come from instead of just the facade of, I mean, we celebrate Easter, but not really in the conventional way that most people do, you know? So
yeah, I mean that's the kind of line that I've taken with my kids. I mean, my eldest is 5, so they're still quite young. So they're just kind of, he's pretty switched on and intuitive and very, very questioning about a lot of stuff already. But they've had no religious element to their upbringing at all. We don't have family that are like that. You know, my parents, if anything, are more in alignment with what I do, and the rest of the family just don't really believe in much. But yeah, taking that line of just explaining what some of those holidays are was something that I did even when I was little. I started to look into paganism because from a young age I knew that there was more, but I didn't know what it was. So I was looking at all the different possibilities, different traditions, different practices to just try and get a flavor for everything. So I was quite aware quite young about, you know, the pagan origins of a lot of the holidays and things. And then when you start realizing that, like, the god Mithras and one of the Egyptian gods and one of the Indian gods, the story of December the 25th, which was December the 21st in most cases, that it's all the same story, the part of the sun dying and rising and that kind of thing. So once you see those patterns as well, you can't not see it then. Right. You can't unsee like those kind of cross parts. But just the way that so many kids are coming in now, so with the most incredible bullshit radars.
Right.
They're just so able to kind of find that and realize that story is just not going to wash anymore, whatever the story is.
Yeah. They're just like, that doesn't add up. And why do people believe that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also like, I don't know if you know this, but I also homeschool my children. And so it's fascinating when they get out in public and they're like, why are they acting like that? Why? What's their problem? You know, and they just notice different things that like people's ticks, and they notice very quickly how sometimes children are like, you know, people are very mean. And it was funny, my daughter the other day, we're sitting in the car and we're talking about something and she's like, you know what? I actually know how that person has a pattern because their mom is like that and then their mom had to have been like that. So it's a family pattern. And I was like, yep, you're right. And I didn't say anything. I was like, yeah, you're right. And she's like, so what would that be considered? And I like told her and she's like, okay. But like you can break those, right? I was like, yes. She's like, okay. I was like, but it's a conscious choice. And she goes, right. So, I mean, she's 8. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you gathered that pretty quickly, little girl.
It's amazing what they're able to tune into when they're not being overcrowded by something else.
Right.
You know, by a different kind of program.
Yep. Yep. And trying to learn social normalities, right? Like what's socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And teaching independence. Like, I think that's really important in childhood is like teaching independence, teaching to speak your truth, learn to walk away when it's not engaging of energy. Like, that's a big one. And yeah, there's lots of aspects of teaching conscious children, especially in a society that's like, you know, when I tell people I homeschool my children, they're like, oh, okay. They're like socially awkward children. I was like, sure, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah. It's a weird perception, isn't it? I think it's just a lot of the time kids being kids. Like kids do weird stuff because they're in imagination when they're allowed to be.
Yep. Well, and I also think that like that is such a program. That is such a program where it's like people think that if your children are in public school systems, they're going to be socialized. When in reality, as someone who's a previous teacher, that was what I have a degree in as an education was. I know you still like think about it. You have socially awkward kids in public school. You have the people who are kind of like the outcasts. You have people who are social people. You have people who are popular. Do you think that's going to change if you don't have them in school? It's not. It's exactly the same. That's what I've noticed anyways, my observation. Yeah. I would love to know statistically how that works out for people. Because honestly, like there are some homeschool kids where I feel like they have better foundational reading skills. They have better abilities to communicate because they're not influenced by the outside. They're like, oh, I'm just going to speak my truth. And if this person doesn't like it, I don't really care, you know?
Yeah. And also kids that are surrounded by a lot of other children that are constantly looking at screens and stuff. Even like, so we don't let the kids on screens. They're allowed a little bit of TV, but no screens, no iPads, no phones, nothing like that. And if their friends are having a lot of that kind of interaction, they're learning their interaction from the screen now. So they're like developing social awkwardness, if you want to call it that, that has never been existing before because their behavior is being picked up from stuff that they're seeing on screens. So they're coming out with stuff that's really inappropriate for their age quite often as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, my kids are just like, well, what's that all about? Because they're not allowed to have that kind of stuff. Yeah. So they don't understand why certain things are in, you know, other kids are talking about certain stuff and they kind of can't really integrate that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I even noticed that even with kids, like depending on the household they've been raised in is essentially, you know, sometimes you have kids that just are inappropriate, you know, and that happens too. So, Okay. So what do you feel is driving public figures and spiritual leaders like Russell Brand to embrace Christianity right now?
I think it's that kind of same thing of just that trying to find a way to connect with the different energies and the different consciousness that's coming in. And, you know, if you think about Russell Brand as an example, he has got a lot of trauma in his past, like you would assume. I don't know him, I don't know that specifically, but from what he's talked about, and you know, his problems with drugs and a lot of kind of struggles in the past, that's a lot of density to unpack by yourself, to not have someone to lead you through it. So if you've not found, or maybe he has found other like figureheads that will be appropriate as a kind of guide through that, but I think a lot of it is to do with just trying to connect with that consciousness because it feels so good. You know, the Christ consciousness is really loving, right? It's a really kind of beautiful energy to connect with, and it's very awake and very aware and very about stepping into divinity yourself. But if you're not knowing how to navigate that, then it's obviously going to kind of align with Christianity in some way for somebody to have it facilitated through that, at least maybe until they're ready to go off and fly on their own and unpack it without like the traps that kind and trimmings that kind of come with structured religion. I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy within religion too, and hopefully people that do kind of go back to those kind of religions as their path will at least be able to find the allegory behind it, rather than taking everything in a literal sense and a literal meaning, because I don't think that that would be particularly helpful to the trajectory that we are trying to go in. But I think also the energetic trajectory that we are moving into will kind of prevent that from happening anyway. I did wonder whether maybe this idea of the 3D, 5D split, whether there will be people that are still kind of holding beliefs because it's based on fear or based on guilt or based on shame or something from their past. Maybe that will be one of the aspects as to where that split could occur if their vibration doesn't lift enough to be able to see that for themselves. But that's just a kind of pondering on what may happen there if the resonance doesn't kind of pick up collectively enough that the whole collective goes into 5D.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people it's like a ripple, right? The more work you do, the more that you hold an energy, the more that you hold a standard, and then that starts to show people kind of like, I want that. Like, that looks good. That feels good. Yeah. And then, obviously you can have the shadow aspects of, people, that polarity, right? Where people are like,
yeah,
why does she think she's entitled to that? It's like always that polarity aspects of understanding both parts. And so, for the listeners listening, I just want to remind you that, like, when you step into your power, that's going to feel really empowering for some people who are going to cheer you on, and it's going to be very triggering and feel like a projection. And I'd like to say that I hope that eventually we'll get better, because just know that, like, if you have toxic friendships or family or ways that people criticize you for you stepping into your power, that's like a completely normal part of awakening, right? And realizing that, like, essentially what you're doing is you're stopping the loop and you're stepping into a different frequency. And that frequency can feel like love and harmony, but it also can feel very triggering for some people. And I always explain to my clients, the first time that you set up a boundary is going to feel like an electric fence for someone who's never experienced a boundary. And it's going to feel like, maybe a little bit of selfishness on your part, or even feeling like you don't necessarily have empathy. And the fact of it is, the first time that you actually stop abandoning yourself, you're going to get a negative reaction from other people. And it's actually going to feel like almost heavy for you, because it's like your default mode is self-abandonment. So then when you choose the default mode to not be self-abandonment, it's essentially going to feel a little uncomfortable in your system. And so I tell people, they're like, I had this beautiful session and I felt so good for like 24 hours. And then like the next day I was like here again. And I was like, right, because that's your default mode. So you have to change the default mode. You have to move through, I call it the default mode, because think of it like every time you start your vehicle, it resets, right? It goes back to the same mode. That's how we are as humans, is that if we don't reset or change that default mode, it's just going to continue to dip back down. And that's when I tell people, I'm like, you have to hold the frequency. You have to make choices that are different. You have to change. And so it's like, you can do the feminine, which is the spiritual aspect of things, and then you have to take an action, spiritual action. And it's that bouncing back forth of feminine, masculine. And you can't just constantly sit in the feminine. You can't constantly sit in the masculine. You have to be able to, flow that energy back and forth. And so I really love how you brought that, like, the spiritual leaders are moving into Christianity. And it's because that's the default mode. That's the default mode. Moving back through, this is kind of a channel, moving back through into something that they think is accurate, right? Moving back into that spiritual space is like, well, religion is what holds spiritual space. New Age, and there's so much toxicity in both New Age, spiritual, Christianity, so many things. And that was one of the reasons why I created this podcast, is because I'm bringing people on to show people, what does it mean to actually be a rebellion? What does it actually mean to show up in your authentic self? Because if you did that, you're not everyone's going to be a fan. And that's okay. We're not here for that.
When you go through your awakening, and you will also find that there are people that you used to enjoy hanging out with that you just don't anymore. That can be like, oh, why don't I want to go out and go like drinking with those people or do this or that? And it's like, because your vibration has changed and you're not a resonant match with them anymore. Don't force yourself into the company of people just because it's like, it might be your oldest friend, but if you don't resonate with them anymore, then that's okay. And I like, one of the kind of key things that I think we need to be able to understand in order to allow ourselves to have that kind of process of ascension, is that every change that we go through, even if it feels like a really destructive change at the time, provides growth. It provides like an opportunity to shift some of the shadow, some of the density, the stuff that is holding us down. Like, you can't kind of keep packing a suitcase and putting more and more in and still be able to close the lid. You have to take some stuff out and make room for the new things, for the stuff that you actually want to have in there. Yeah, certainly going through the process of awakening is going to shake up who you resonate with and who you want to be around and who you want to be a part of. And they are also going to sometimes find your company triggering or jarring or whatever, and you can just find that out and allow yourself to move in whichever direction is the most natural.
Yeah, I explain it as don't allow the sticky energy of someone's frequency to stick to you.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that's good.
You know,
good
just
analogy.
like every time I tell a client that's working on psychic abilities or like I'm super clairsentient, is like if you do your spiritual hygiene every day, if you start to realize like, and if you cleanse your chakra systems and field on a regular, I do it every day. Not everybody is an everyday person, but for me, because I'm so clairsentient, it's an everyday, sometimes twice a day experience, and sealing that aura field, because your aura has 7 layers, and those
Yes.
7 layers are essentially moving through. Plus you have your emotional body, plus you have your physical body, and your multidimensional being. And if you understand how to cleanse, clear, and protect, life-changing.
Yeah.
Life-changing.
You've also got to navigate what it is. Like, you know, the term empath gets overly used, and I think can often be a way of shirking or not facing the parts that you haven't healed yet. So you think, you know, like you're going to think, oh, it's brought in from someone else. Okay, well, it's not mine. It's brought in from someone else, and therefore it's not something I've got to deal with. That will be the case for certain things. And being highly empathic often makes you more able to tune into people if you're doing healing and stuff like that. You know, there's definitely a truth to being an empath. Like, I use it for work. It's like, it's a tool. But it used to be a curse until I understood how to separate what was someone else's and what was mine. And actually, I had a lot of shit that I had to deal with, a lot of stuff that I had to get rid of.
Guilty.
So that, and then it's like, oh, okay, now I truly understand what it means, because I'm not breaking down and crying every 5 minutes because somebody's energy has affected me. Actually, they were just a reflection of something that wasn't healed. And so you can find out what the truth of that is better once you have been able to acknowledge, once you're able to fine tune and start paying attention to where you're being triggered and what is maybe psychological or what is stuck in the energy. If you keep cleansing your energy system, you start to get a better perspective of that, because you're not carrying around somebody else's stuff, so you can do your own work, allow your vibration to lift, and then when your vibration is higher, you won't come so much into contact with people that are in a lower vibration and affecting your energy anyway, because by the, you know, law of attraction, like attracts like, you know, you don't come into that resonance with people as much because they're just not drawn, you're not drawn to each other. It's like you kind of repel a different vibration.
Well, yeah,
certainly one.
That repellent is legit. I mean, I don't know if you ever had that when someone is in your life too long and you're like, yeah, spirit told me to get rid of that person 6 months ago, and now it's like full repellent. It's like,
yes,
you get in their field and you trigger the shiz out of them, and they get mad, and they're probably like, why am I so mad? You know, one thing I want to add to that is like, when you learn how to cleanse, clear, and protect, it's when you start, especially as someone that I loved how you brought up, like being an empath can be a curse, because oh my gosh, every empath, every clairsentient person that's super clairsentient and naturally psychic, they all are going to say this. When you understand your shadow, which is the empath, right? That shadow aspect of yourself is the curse of feeling everybody's crap. That's the shadow. The medicine is the ability to use that clairsentient ability to be able to heal yourself, help people understand themselves, and be able to be like, this isn't mine, this is mine, or understand that this energy, it's almost like moving yourself out of survival, that like animal instinct of, I explain it like this. Think of it like this. If a deer is in a field and it feels like there's a hunter nearby, what's the actually response? They feel it, right? They know something, they can feel the danger. They flight. So it's the same thing as clairsentience. Like when you feel the dense energy come into your field, your body goes into some form of a trauma response. When you can learn how to transmute that, because you can learn, that's not mine, this is mine, this is mine. And when you clean and clear it, because you can't process someone else's crap. That was like one of the biggest lessons for me, is like, I can feel, oh, I can just transmute it. But that's a survival. That's a survival from being raised in a home. That's what I had to learn how to do, is like, oh, I'm going to transmute this energy so that I don't have to feel that, right? That classic shadow aspects of an empath, and being able to move that energy and be like, that's not mine. That's not mine.
Yeah.
That's not mine. Right. And why did I feel like I needed to take that on? Here's the shadow. I felt like I had to take that on to survive.
Yeah. I went through a very similar thing. Like when I was in my late teens to sort of mid-20s, quite often I would have panic attacks out at like bars or clubs and stuff like that at night time. And I'd often get to around 12 and I would suddenly be overwhelmed and start crying and just have to bolt. And it was really, and I just didn't kind of know what was going on. And then as I learned psychic development and learned how to actually, you know, function with the stuff that was going on, realized what it was all about. And that a lot of the time, okay, there were some things that were maybe being shown to me because I had a lot of healing to do. I really had a lot of work that I had to do on myself. But also, I hadn't realized that I'd had 20 years of uncleansed energies coming in all the time. And somebody showed me that. They showed me how to kind of recognize whether it was mine. And it was a game changer. And I was out in a local pub. It was around midnight. And this person walked past me and it was like, whack. I just physically felt it. It was like they pushed me over and I felt myself move back. And then I felt really sad, and I could feel that kind of starting to come over me. And then I remembered what this person had taught me and was like, oh, if it's not mine, take it away. And I kind of did, the techniques I had at the time. And it was gone. And that was it. And I didn't have a panic. That was it. I was fine that night. I carried on getting pissed, which was another huge aspect that I hadn't healed at that point. But I was able to stay there and function and not be overwhelmed by someone else's emotion. And that really changed it. And then that also helped me to then be able to work out what were the aspects that were me? What were the bits that I had to shift? Because I was masking a lot of the things that I was kind of experiencing with drinking and stuff like that. So yeah, I went through that experience.
Yeah, I think most of us go through that experience that are empaths and very gifted people, is that we come to the point where we're just like, I don't want to go to the grocery store and feel overwhelmed. I don't want to go do this and feel overwhelmed. And honestly, I still have days where I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to do people today. I just don't have the capacity. And there's certain places that I just I'm not going to that place. I know what that feels like, and I don't like the way that makes me feel. And then it's that emotion, because just for the listeners to understand, is when you're a sponge, essentially, and you're not clearing and cleansing and protecting, that's going to show up as overwhelmed, overstimulated, panic attacks, depression, anxiety, and all of those aspects of mental health that we think are mental health. But as soon as you learn how to cleanse, clear, and protect, how come those things just magically go away? And it's because your system is overloaded, and that's your body actually communicating with you, right? The body keeps score. So the body's saying, I can't handle anymore, so I'm going to rage out. I'm going to have an anger episode. I'm going to have this. That even goes for some children, some people, is they're feeling things that they can't express or feel. And so that's really important to I know I'm teaching my children how to clear their energy, or know, hey, is this yours or is this someone else's? I've even had my daughter one time come up to me after dance and be like, I need you to clear my field, right now. Because she can feel it, she's an empath. And so what a tool that's going to make for them, children in the future, to know this actually isn't, I do think people have mental illness, but it's not always that. It can be from energy. I love how we're talking about this right now, because I think it's really important for people to realize, if you are someone that feels energy at a really high level, learn the tools to clear, cleanse, and protect. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a spiritual entrepreneur. It doesn't mean you have to be a psychic. It doesn't mean you have to step into the community, but learning tools to protect yourself, life-changing.
Yeah. And I think that another aspect that starts to play into that comes into the collective, because we create energies from our own energy, right? Or you don't create energy, it's kind of always there.
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
Form it into something, So collectively humans make an egregore, right? I don't, if anyone hasn't heard that term, it's an old Greek term meaning basically an energy that is form from human energy, and it will feed off of that energy. And you can have positive ones. So like I remember Kedrick Olson referred to it as like the spirit of Christmas, right? It's like from all this collective idea about this jolly being that's going to come and bring presents and stuff, and it creates like an actual kind of feeling in the air, right? But you have negative egregores too, which are often the things that seem to be created and then feed situations like the fear through the pandemic and stuff. So this massive energy gets generated and everyone's anxiety gets collected and put into that. So if you're highly empathic and you have not recognized that and you don't know how to deal with it, you're going to generate a huge amount of energy which you're going to push into this kind of thing that might be being created by the collective, which is then going to use your fear to feed itself. And then you end up, in that kind of perpetual cycle and loop until you recognize it and go, I'm not going to give you my power anymore. Yeah. And then it has nothing over you, or you laugh at it and it's just like, picks up stumps and goes home.
The emotional response is gone.
Yeah. So I think like understanding it's such a tool to, if you are highly empathic, which I think a lot of people are, particularly if they're drawn to spirituality, it's likely to be there. That cleansing also comes into the benefit of the collective, because you're not going to be contributing to making these like demons or whatever they're sort of perceived to be.
Yeah, lower entities, vampiric energy.
Yeah.
And honestly, I tell people, I'm like, people are like, oh, I think I have an entity attached to me. I'm like, actually, it's your husband. Like, just to be real.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually your husband.
So good.
Am I right though? Like, how many times you're like,
yeah,
actually,
so right.
it's someone in your life. Yeah, I always tell clients, I'm like, if you start to get lightheaded or dizzy or nauseous around somebody, that's someone coming in and like siphoning your energy. Yeah. Game changer for anxiety for people when you can understand that like people can siphon your energy. I can't tell you at this point in my life, it's like if someone comes in and I start to get lightheaded, I'm like, not today, Satan, not today.
Yeah. It's quite fun when you can kind of talk to energy and stuff like that in a more playful way, because you take the seriousness out of it. It does so much to kind of transmute the energy. So I do like clearing sometimes of houses and, if people have got stuff and that kind of thing. And it sounds so stupid, like when I describe it, but I'll pretend I've got a gun and just be like, pew, pew. And it's like that kind of lightness and that play that comes into it. And they're just, you can feel they're like, this bitch isn't scared of me. Like, what am I'm gonna go now. Like, this is not doing anything for me.
Yeah.
So if you can play around with it, and I teach the kids that technique as well. Like my the youngest is too young at the moment, but that, because he can kind of get that as a fun game. It's like if something's energy is bad, you can, shoot it away with your own energy.
Yeah.
Because you play around with it, and just we can get very much in spirituality and religion and things very much pulled into the seriousness of it. But actually, like, we're all having a human experience. We're all having an experience with energy and different other energies, and just learning how to kind of navigate that. It doesn't have to be serious all the time, and quite often that does transmute the egregore or the kind of dark energies that come into that.
Yep. I completely agree with that, like playful energy, and teaching, like even teaching from a perspective of like, if you're an encompass of Christ consciousness, then you can essentially be an embodiment and a frequency, and you can move that energy in whatever direction you want to. But if you're coming from a place of like fear and demonic energy and demons or whatever, it's always fascinating. I actually was interviewing someone yesterday and she's like, when they have like those paranormal, it's always a demon. And you're like, I'm just like laughing at this point. I'm like, oh my goodness, definitely not a demon,
Yeah.
Totally different energy, folks. Like, this is called residual energy. This is someone's trauma that's trapped in this time and space. Like, yeah. And so it's always fascinating to watch people's identification of like paranormal activity. It's like, I've always been fascinated. Like, what if we took 5 or 6, really powerful healers in a haunted place and actually like brought light to that place? What would it shift in the grid? And knowing how we know what we do and like moving energy. I've always wanted to like, maybe that's my next retreat, is like going to a haunted place and be like, we're going to clear this shit up.
I have the perfect one for you. When I was pregnant with the eldest, I got jumped in by a spirit, and that's the first time I'd ever had something like actually come into my body without my permission.
Wow.
I was not aware that being pregnant really, really heightens your kind of ability and also how susceptible you are to energy. But so it's this really old house. It's like a 14th century house, I think, in Kent in England. And I'd gone in there, and as I was walking around, I was just kind of feeling the energy, because usually I'll pick up some spirit and kind of see what's around. It's quite fun, just have a play with it. But there'd be nothing, and we got about 3/4 of the way through the house, and my mum was like, "Have you felt anything?" I was like, "No, it's really boring," kind of thing. And I got to literally the next room we went into, and I was just kind of like feeling it between my hands, and it suddenly got really, really thick and heavy, and I felt sick, and I started like spinning like I was going to faint, and I've fainted before, so I knew what that sensation was. And I started like scrambling to my mum, and I was like, could hardly speak, like, "Babe, get out," kind of just trying to talk, like waddling around pregnant. And we couldn't find a chair anywhere because they all had the little signs on, "Ancient furniture, please don't sit on this," and stuff, but we had to clear one off. And I sat down, and as far as I knew, I just passed out. And I came to, everyone's around me, and I just had this, I had to leave. I had to get out of the building. That's what I'd been trying to do. And so I was walking out, like my mum was kind of supporting me, so it was a bit wobbly. And she said, "Was that a ghost?" And I kind of looked at her, I was like, "How do you know that?" Because she would have just usually assumed I'd just fainted, like, you know, being pregnant or something like that, I don't know. And she said, "Because your eyes were open, like wide open, and you were making these really strange noises." And that doesn't happen when you faint. You know, you usually have your eyes shut or they roll back or something. But I love it to be able to sit bolt upright as well. And we got outside, and I could still feel this thing in there, and I was kind of concerned because I was pregnant. I was like, "Don't you dare think you're going to be attaching to my son." Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know it was a boy at that time, I don't think. And I just went like, "Get the fuck out of me." And then I felt sick. I went to the bathroom, threw up, and it was it. It was gone. Wow. That was it. It was done. And then later that evening, I went home and I started researching this house. And a woman had been bricked up alive in the room below where I was. She was part of the Guy Fawkes gunpowder plot, and she'd been caught and bricked up alive and left to die. So that was where that feeling of like desperate need to escape had kind of come from.
Yeah.
And that got me kind of really like looking at things in a new way, because I'd never really kind of believed that things could jump in and stuff. And I think it got me to understand so much about keeping yourself energetically healthy and vibration. I mean, it was just a scared spirit. It wasn't a demon or anything. You know, there would be people that would think it was a demon who tried to jump in. It was just someone who, like, an energy that wanted to break its loop, wanted to get out of the place that it was stuck in. But it's quite different when you have such a physical experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that leads me to I know we didn't talk about this beforehand, but would your Pleiadians like to have a message?
Yeah, I can bring them through. Takes maybe like a minute or so, and then they'll usually announce that they're here, but just remember to bring me back.
Yeah, I'll bring you back.
Just be sat here. Yes, hello. We are looking forward to this opportunity to connect with you and bring through any questions, answers, information that you might have in order to reach people and create further expansion of the human consciousness, which we are very interested in watching at the moment.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to ask if you guys have any particular message for humanity. I mean, we're about halfway through 2025, and a lot of things have changed. There's a lot of, upheaval that's happening. What do you have for advice for humanity?
We want you to sit tight at the moment, because there is going to be more turbulence. We know that you will experience quite a lot of chaos if the trajectory remains in the way that it is at the moment. You see, any precognition we would like to advise is depending on the collective energy at the time, and you do have a choice of changing that. But when you are talking about collective events, the energy is very, very strong, and it takes more manipulation in order for that to change. So your trajectory as humans at the moment is on a path to ascension, as you would often term it. You are moving into states of higher consciousness and higher vibration, which you will find very benevolent and a huge alteration of your human experience. But as you move through and allow yourselves to achieve that state, there is often a lot of chaos. As Jessica has described before, there is density which must be released. And sometimes for humans to move into other vibrations very quickly, which is not something that often happens on your planet or on others and within other star systems. Usually movement into a different vibration happens more slowly, but you are actually having quite a quick change. It may not feel like it to some of you who have been waiting for this awakening process to happen for many years, but it is fast. And therefore there will be those who are very, very rocked and wobbled by this change in energy. And that will often play itself out as negative events, because energy is then generated and directed through fear. And so you experience more fear-based paradigms as you go through that process. But they are becoming dispersed as people become more awake and aware. There is a higher vibration which creates bigger resonance. So more of humans will be altered into states of high vibration because of the few that are already in those states. So it is quicker to move into a higher state of vibration once the movement has actually begun, because of the resonance that it creates amongst the rest of the collective. So we know that this next 18 months or so is going to be particularly challenging for you. We see 2027 as being a point where there is a pinnacle in the opportunity for awakening. And we believe that this is when, if there is a split between the fifth and the third dimension, that will occur. We are working with you as much as possible, as our other galactic races, with your permission, to help bring through higher states of consciousness so that this split does not occur, because it is in the interest of all beings throughout the galaxies and the universe if you move collectively rather than having the split, because of the way that energy works and the way that it creates more of the higher, more loving vibrations. But should that split occur, it is likely to be around the time of 2027. There will be many of you that go into much higher states of consciousness, and you may not even notice the 3D reality anymore. You will not necessarily move onto a different physical plane, but you will experience reality very, very differently. And the beings that could possibly remain in a third dimension are also unlikely to experience much of the fifth. But the movement to this time, to this potential split or potential movement into the fifth collectively, which is what we hope for you, is likely to be challenging in order for a lot of the old wounds that you have experienced throughout several millennia now to be released, brought to the surface in order for you to release it. We know that you spoke with Jessica about the idea of a witch wound. That is just one of many collective traumas that is coming up to be released. That is why you often see this competitive element between women, as you remember the times where you had to sometimes cause pain for another in order to survive yourself, but you are overcoming that now. So we just advise you to sit tight and to do the best that you can on focusing your energy on the positive things within your life, whether they are small things and small events, or whether you are able to observe larger events in a more positive way. We would suggest for many of you to start with the things at home that are close to you, the moments that bring you joy. And the more that you put your focus onto that perspective, it will help you to more quickly move into higher vibrations. And you will also then have the effect on the collective of bringing each other into that resonance, so that you may all move into fifth dimensional consciousness, and possibly you will transcend fifth rather quickly after that, together and more easily.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful message. I have one more for you if you're okay with that.
Yes, of course.
What role does light codes and light language and DNA activations play in humanity's evolution?
So the light codes that come through to many of you, it feels very spontaneous to many of you. Some of you may choose to focus on bringing through light codes and do it with awareness, but whether it is aware or whether it is spontaneous, it is often a sign that the body is moving into more alignment with higher frequencies. So if you imagine, as many of you may be aware, when there are sounds played to water, the water will often develop a certain pattern. And depending on the type of music that it is played, those patterns can look beautiful and coherent, or they can look messy and disorganized. And that field of energy, the field of energy that surrounds you as humans, creates the same sort of patterns. You don't see them. Some of you may perceive them when you're in meditative states or when you have Kundalini activation. A lot of you will see the geometrical patterns. But essentially, light language is a balance, a coherence between the energy. The light codes help to organize the energy around you so that they make those more beautiful patterns. And that affects the actual energy of your body, and it affects your consciousness, and it will often cause DNA activation. There are activations coming in through different entities as well, from higher frequencies that wish benevolence upon you. And they are able to bring transmission sometimes through sound and frequency. So we know that many of you hear ringing in your ears. Some of you put that down to biological reasons. Others believe it is because of solar flares, although the solar flares play a part in causing these activations too. We are able to work with the energy of your flares sometimes. But those ringings are often to do with activations happening within your own body as your physical form starts to align with the high frequencies of the energy. So if you imagine a kaleidoscope and it begins to form more beautiful patterns, you shake it up and the patterns become more chaotic. And this is what you experience as a collective reality too when you go through the chaos. But then the energy can be restructured by different sound. Light codes is one of those sounds. The ringing that is brought through is sometimes those sounds. And there are sounds that are subtle, not audible to you, but they are creating frequencies within your own planet. And these are causing the body to upgrade. And as the DNA becomes, as you would term, it is able to pick up on these subtle changes and actually tune your body to these frequencies, even when some of you are unaware that this process is happening.
Yeah. So what I've understood is through the mantis beings I've been working with is that light language is just a piece of the actual activation, and that it's like, you get piece by piece of actually how to recode DNA. And so what I understood was light language is like, it's creating the perfect environment, but then you have a next step. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and the mantis beings are frequently responsible for the conveying of light codes and for some of the sounds that you start to perceive, particularly the sounds that you start to perceive as you become more clairaudient or able to hear psychically. They communicate predominantly by frequency and by vibration, which you may transmute itself into words for you sometimes, but quite often when you make connection with the mantis beings, you have a concept moves into your body and you're able to feel what their message is for you. But the movement of sound and the movement of vibration often comes from them and does a lot to activate you in this way.
Yeah. Yeah, they're sharing different technologies that are going to actually shift the DNA.
Yes. And technologies, you often, as humans, you will perceive them as something that is created, but this is not necessarily the case. There are natural technologies or consciously chosen, consciously created through energy rather than needing to take a physical form.
Yeah, that's the way I understood it too. Yeah, different coding systems is what they explained it to me.
Yes.
And so do you believe, as Pleiadians have watched Earth, have the DNA just been scrambled essentially, and so that it implants like disease and heavier emotions? Is that correct?
To some degree, yes. It's more that the signal, as you say, scrambled, it alters the signal in the sense that it makes it more difficult for you to remember your connection to your energy and to source and to your ability for your own healing. And that's what causes the disease. So it is not the DNA being messed up directly that causes the disease. It is the disconnection it brings you from your own energetic abilities and the way that it brings you into the density of the body without connection to the spiritual aspects that you possess.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here today on the Sacred Rebellion podcast.
You're welcome. We are very pleased always to have this opportunity to connect with you and enjoy to watch your journey.
Thank you. Can we bring Jessica back, please?
Of course.
Hello, you're back.
Oh,
I'm sure it's a little disoriented. I know when I channel my mantis beings, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm back.
Oh, yeah, I love the mantis beings. I did a channeling a few nights ago with a live audience and they were speaking a lot about them and about sound.
Mm-hmm.
And when I listened back to the recording, so I don't always remember that much of it. It's kind of like dream state.
Yeah, I only channel them in my own safety of my home, in typically a bathtub. And I just get the downloads. So
great.
Yeah.
And I've had a few people do sessions with me that have had abductee stories, but the pleasant ones are often they've asked, when I've been channeling, who's been responsible for this, and it's quite often the mantis beings, but they're often the abductions that have been pleasant, where someone has come back feeling like they're more spiritually connected. And the Pleiadians have spoken about this and saying that they, like, a lot of the purpose that they do, so before the person is incarnated for a start, there's been a soul contract where that agreement has been made that they're going to have that adjustment at some point in their human experience, and the mantis beings will then make those kind of adjustments, often to the DNA and to the kind of the energetic structure of a person, in a way that makes them then able to come and bring that kind of higher consciousness through to other humans too. So
yeah, it's a
stories.
lot. I will tell you right now, when they start to download information, the frequency is a lot.
Yeah,
Sometimes I'll get the downloads and I'll be in public and I'm like, guys, it will be like in the middle of a dance competition where I'm surrounded with hundreds of people and I'm like, this is not the time. But until I like sit on my phone and like write down the download, then it will go away. But it's like,
yeah,
guys, this is, and I get they don't understand, but in the same boat, I'm like, I don't have capacity for this. I'm like about to throw up because of all the energy, it's sometimes a lot.
yeah.
And
I know, I work with them quite a lot, and I'll get so I don't channel them as in voice channel them like this, but they come through in meditation, and the concept though is so, like, it's so felt sort of within the body, and then you come out of that kind of altered meditative state and it's really difficult to explain what you've just perceived, or it may be something that seems like a really simplistic concept, but you feel it at such a profound level that you can't, trying to bring through the words of, this is what they were telling me. Like, guys, this is a really big deal.
yeah.
It's really hard to kind of convey that
Yeah,
sometimes.
they bring codes in the back of the neck for me, and what we're working through is like nervous system recalibrations to be able to anchor in these higher codes of like DNA structures and stuff like that. So yeah, they're very fascinating. I don't channel them like you do with the Pleiadians either. It's more of like a meditative state where I get like a load
Yeah,
of information and then I have to write it down because it's so much in my crown chakra that if I don't write it down of
yeah,
some form, then it just sits in there and I feel like a freaking balloon head like this with so much information, right?
yeah. But they've kind of said that the mantis beings are basically predominantly in 12th dimension. They don't often, like, they don't seem to really drop below that. And that's why you don't tend to get people voice channel them, because you take a certain amount of that energy into your body and they're just like, it's so, so different to the human body that it would just exhaust you afterwards. So they can come in with kind of drop-ins and stuff, but to sit there and go, yeah, okay, like, let's be about, and they also communicate much more telepathically and through sentience rather
Yeah.
than words anyway.
Yeah, and well, and
Not being
my
filtered.
strongest clair is clairsentient, so that would make sense why that's why I just like
Yeah.
receive it and then I translate the information into words. And it's very interesting because I know a lot of people don't translate their light language actually into verbiage, but I can do that often, is like be able to take the frequency that I got in light language and be like, this is what this is moving. This is what this is
Yeah.
bringing. This is, and I've been able to do that for about a year and a half now. And so I feel like that's like kind of like almost like the initiation was like, now we're going to give you light codes and light language an array of light language. And then we're going to want you to conspel it into verbiage so that people can understand what's happening in the physical body. So you can start connecting people into their clairsentient, because most people, a lot of people I have found is like, they've shut that off. Right? They're like, I'm not
Yeah.
going to connect with my emotions. I am not safe to connect with my emotions. So it's like that communication of the connection of the frequency into verbiage so that the human mind can process it, I feel like is a game changer for a lot of people.
Yeah. If I do, I don't do light language that often, but when I do, everyone's always kind of a little bit like they feel different afterwards. The physical sensation is really different afterwards. And quite often, if I do it, so sometimes I do it with a group of, I'll lead them in a meditation first, get them all into that state. Everyone will see what has come through. So I'll, like, as the codes are coming through, I'll see certain images and get like a sense of what it is they're actually bringing through. So not direct translation, but I can understand what the purpose of that particular transmission is. And often everyone else in the group would have seen
Similar.
the same kind of thing, same symbols or movements and patterns and stuff like that. So it's amazing how it brings everyone into synchronicity.
Yeah, it's that unity of oneness.
They're great beings. I love them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're going to wrap up today with Jessica. Thank you for walking this path with us as a sacred rebel. If this episode stirred something in you, an awakening, a remembrance, a fire, a trust that is not by accident, you are here for a reason. You're part of an arising wave of truth tellers, grid shifters, and system breakers, reclaiming their divine design. If you loved today's conversation, share it with another rebel who's ready to rise. Leave a review, hit that subscribe button, and stay plugged into the frequency, because the revolution isn't coming, it's already here. Until next time, keep choosing your soul over the system, one sacred rebellion at a time. Have a great day.